Welcome to the Mind Solution podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Mind Solution podcast. And we're here today to talk about resilience, which, let's face it, in today's world, it's a really important and poignant time for us to get to grips with what it actually means to be a human being living at this time resilient. What it actually looks like. And what are the components that make up whether somebody is resilient or whether they're not. And so many people over the years have asked me, is resilience a trait? Is it a process? Is it a skill? Are some people just naturally born more resilient than others? Well, they're all great questions and ones that we're going to be unpacking today so that you leave this session with a very clear understanding of what resilience actually is and also what we need to do as organisational leaders to equip our employees to become more resilient during these uncertain times. So if I was to just ask you to cast your mind back about 20 years, I wonder when you think about the term resilience, what that might have meant to you 20 years ago compared to now. You know, maybe you would have viewed the term resilience as that classic bounce back. As the quotes often say, the ability to bounce back from a situation or an event in the face of adversity and recover from that much more quickly. And quite a lot of people talk about previous generations being more resilient. So like our grandparents and our grandparents before that. And I wonder, was that resilience? Was there a sense of you just grit your teeth, put your head down and get on with things? You know, when we think about this term resilience, what does it actually look like? And if, you know, gritting your teeth, putting your head down and getting on with things, or just developing a thick skin, is that what makes us resilient? Because actually, developing a thick skin and just getting on with things, which is how I've heard some organisational leaders refer to as resilience, can actually have the opposite effect. It can imply that we have to stuff down our emotions. You know, emotions like vulnerability, pain, hurt, grief, loss. And actually stuffing down these emotions in order to just get on with things really isn't a helpful way to respond to situations. It has the opposite effect because when we stuff down our emotions, when we don't recognise them and therefore process them, we actually hold the body in the stress response, the survival response. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But also if we think about our parents and our grandparents' generation and what they faced, they did live in very different times compared to where we are now. You know, they didn't have the internet for a start. They didn't have all the choices that we have nowadays. I don't know about you, but, you know, walking into the supermarket and getting faced with 100 different brands of toothpaste can actually just be really overwhelming. It's like our brain has just got too many choices. And they had a different set of values. They had a very different way of life, social norms. And I also think that they had a much greater sense of community. especially in our grandparents' generation, people came together. If we think about the war that people have fought and have gone through, and how we can perhaps compare that with where we are at the moment with COVID, people came together, they supported one another. There was this much greater sense of community. You would have more likely known people on your street. You would have supported them. Stood on the doorstep talking, or come in, have a cup of tea, sit down, I've got your back, I've got time to listen to you. They would have talked things through, I think, a lot more than we do now. So I don't really think that we can compare our parents and our grandparents' generations with what we're going through and whether they're more resilient or less resilient than we are now, because I think that's kind of comparing an apple to a banana, because there's just too many different influencing factors. So now when we talk about resilience and we think about this old classic bounce back, what does that actually mean in today's world? What does bouncing back actually look like? Because it could be fair to say that in today's world, for a lot of people, we're not just bouncing back from one thing. We're often bouncing back from a lot of things. It's like we're human pinball machines going from one thing to the next. And there's so many demands on our time. Thinking about juggling childcare responsibilities, caring responsibilities, school systems that don't operate the same hours as the workplace, and having to somehow manage that. Trying to do things within a 9-to-5, not greatly flexible culture, although certainly working from home is seeing to that. So we've got so much more pressure in the workplace as well compared to previous generations, a much greater focus on KPIs, on targets, objectives, cost saving, lean working, improving productivity, improving performance. And that in itself can put a lot of pressure on people. This pressure for people to be at their best, this fear of not being seen to be good enough, people going out of their way to prove themselves. So many more activities that we cram into our lives, into our weekend, that can actually just leave us feeling quite time fatigued. And then we've also got this always on culture. We've got people, constantly connected to devices, to social media, and all of that creates overstimulated minds. And people, they really struggle to just switch off, to just breathe, to just be at one with themselves, to be in their own company. And I've heard so many people say, I don't like being in my own company. I don't like being alone with my thoughts. And it's like they're trying to run away from themselves. And their minds, again, are like a pinball machine, going from one thought to the next. And they're so used to being overstimulated and being distracted from themselves and how they feel that they do struggle to just be in their own company, be on their own. And people generally are always looking for a distraction, whether that's Netflix, Facebook, other platforms that are social media based. So what is it that we're teaching people about just being in this moment, not having to distract ourselves all the time? And then we also have far more people that live in isolation, that live on their own, that perhaps other generations wouldn't have had so much of. So we have more people feeling more lonely, living their lives through devices rather than in-person human interactions. And while social media can be a positive thing, depending on how it's used, it can also create a sense of my life isn't good enough. We look at other people's lives and we see what's projected on Facebook, on Instagram and we compare ourselves. Or we create this fear of missing out. Look at how much choice we have, things that we can buy. And it's often about a focus of what we need to buy, what we need to own, instead of actually appreciating what we have got. So when we add all of that into this big mixing pot and then add on a global pandemic, well, it's reasonable to understand why people are cracking. They're really showing the cracks. And if we go back to this term resilience, well, where does resilience play a part in this? Is it about bouncing back, or is it actually about something altogether different? So something I'm going to just bring into your consideration here is also about time and the concept of time. Now, we know that all we ever have is right here and right now. The only place that we're ever at is in this moment, in this present moment. So when you first started listening to this podcast, that was maybe, 5 minutes ago? That's now in the past. That's history. And by the time you finish this podcast, that's in the future. That's not happened yet. That's just a dream. And it's like that saying that yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, and today is a gift. And that's why we call it the present. So if all we ever have is right now is just a moment in time, then how can we bounce back from something if all we ever have is right now? So from a time perspective, we're never bouncing back from anything because we're only ever here in this present moment. So therefore, the perception of bouncing back from something is only ever a psychological one. You know, I can almost sense the clogs in your brain turning and whirling over that. And yeah, you're like, I can actually see where she's coming from. She's right. How can we bounce back from anything when all we ever have is now? So maybe that whole psychological bounce back is our perception. And it's about where's our focus of attention at any one time. Is our focus of attention on the past, about something that we can no longer change, that we've no longer got control over? Or is it worrying about the future, worrying about worst case scenario, things that haven't happened yet? Trying to change outcomes? Or is that focus of attention on now, which is where all of our power and our ability to create exists, in the mind, in this present moment? And that's not anything to do, by the way, with planning. We can still plan for the future. When we can all plan to go on holiday, woohoo! Then we can all plan, what date we're going to go on, and we can focus on the future. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm not saying that we can't plan for things. But when it comes to bouncing back from an event, that's very much based on where our focus of attention is. Is it in the past? Is it in the future? Or is it right here and right now, which is where everything gets created in this moment? And the thoughts that you think and the feelings that you feel in this moment affect the next moment and the moment after that. But you're only ever creating it right here and right now. So I'll just let that seed germinate in your mind and grow roots and shoots and leaves. So moving on, a lot of people ask the question, can you teach resilience? Or is it something that we are innately born with? And I absolutely believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that resilience can be taught. Because I believe that resilience is actually a state of mind. I don't believe that resilience is bouncing back. I believe that resilience is a state of mind. Now, there's people that say, I think that, people are just born with it. But I push back against that and I say, well, we all come into the world pretty much the same way. And we have experiences. And these experiences that shape and influence the way that we think and we feel, the messages that we receive from our caregivers, the environment that we grow up in that forms our identity, the love and the support, how much we were nurtured. And all of that is a learning process. Now, most of it would have been an unconscious learning process, but the brain would have still gone through a process of learning. And actually, the first 6 years of your life is where all of your core identity, learnt behaviours and beliefs are formed. So if we can learn all of that, can we learn a different way of being? Can we learn to become more resilient? Absolutely. Because what is resilience? Resilience is about how we respond to situations. And how we respond to situations depends on the way that we think and we feel and we act, what we believe about ourselves. And all of that can be taught. I've spent the last 10 years teaching that. So can we teach resilience? Absolutely. And because the brain is made of neuroplasticity, which means that it's moldable. So when we are consciously creating a new state of mind, a new way of thinking, a new way of feeling, a new way of behaving, then we are changing the neural structures of the mind and therefore the brain. It's like we're changing the operating platform. And I think that's what the brain is like. It's like this giant operating platform. And we get to decide, a bit like with a computer, what software we download into the motherboard that affects its efficiency. And how we manage and navigate our way through situations. How we think about situations, how we respond to situations. And when you learn something again and again, you reinforce that learning. It becomes habitual, it becomes automatic, it becomes a state of being. And quite often, well, not quite often, it does become unconscious. Because once you've learned how to do something, it's like driving a car. You don't consciously think anymore about how am I driving this car. You did when you first started to learn to drive. It was all mirror signal manoeuvres. But now, I would imagine that the vast majority of you can just hop in the car and off you go without thinking of it. Which just shows how we can learn to do something that then becomes a very unconscious process. And it's the same with learning how to navigate your way through a life situation and all the conditions around you. It's very much like the analogy of driving. You're driving through just new territory, going to a different destination. And how you handle the vehicle, which is like how we handle our body. And it might interest you to know that when you learn something again and again, you reinforce that learning. It becomes habitual. It becomes that state of being. And when you do learn something, when you learn something new, you actually develop between 1,300 and 2,600 synaptic connections. But unless you revisit that information, often within a matter of hours, you start to lose those connections. But as I say, the brain is the most amazing operating platform that you can wire, and you can create new ways of thinking, new ways of responding emotionally. And when you reinforce that through pattern and repetition, then you're creating a whole new state of being, a whole new state of mind. And I think this is about teaching employees how to achieve that. And what we're not saying that you're broken. We're not saying that you need fixing. It's just that you have this operating system, this state of mind that maybe isn't working for you. Maybe there's a better way of showing up, a better way of you being the best version of yourself. Because sometimes the way that we think might actually be our Achilles heel. And I had this conversation even this morning with an individual who was like, yeah, I always think worst case scenario. Because if I think worst case scenario, then I know what's coming. I know what to expect. I can plan for it. Now that's classic survival thinking. But does it work to our advantage? What if we were to think best case scenario? What if we were to, imagine going into a meeting, a presentation, a pitch, and really getting behind ourselves, cheering ourselves on, letting ourselves know, you know what, I've got this, I can do this. And that's not at all about being egotistical. That's about us champing, I can't pronounce that word, being our own best champion from the inside out, because it creates a whole different electromagnetic signature. It creates a very different emotional response in the body when you are thinking best case scenario compared to worst case scenario. And I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, yeah, but what if something goes wrong? Yeah, what if something goes wrong? If you trust and believe that you've got the confidence to handle whatever comes along because you've reaffirmed to yourself, I can do this, I've got this. And again, this comes down to our relationship with ourselves, the identity that we have with ourselves, then you're going to be able to navigate that situation and respond to that situation and find your way through to the other side far more effectively than the person thinking worst case scenario. So just think about that. So moving on, what I would also say is that for me, resilience isn't about being perfect. This isn't about us saying that we're never going to lose our cool, that we're not going to drop a ball, that we're not going to have a wobble. Because let's face it, you're human. And there are so many factors that affect our state of mind, our state of being. And that's just about being human. So being this really resilient person isn't about being superhuman, although it's quite nice to think about myself as Wonder Woman at times. It's recognizing that, sometimes we are going to maybe drop a ball. And how we then respond to that is also, again, about the relationship that we have with ourselves. Are we going to treat ourselves with kindness and compassion, or are we going to give ourselves a beating? And things are going to happen. Life is going to throw you lemons. But the resilient person knows how to make lemonade. They know how to manage that situation in a way that they don't get stuck in the experience. But of course, we're all going to have off days. We're all going to have days when actually maybe all we do want to do is sit on the sofa and watch Netflix and eat ice cream. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as we don't allow that to become our reference point. As long as we don't allow that to become our state of being, how we then deal with situations by turning away from them instead of facing them. And let's face it, at the moment, we are all having our resilience tested. The way that the rules keep changing, what we can do, what we're free to do. I know for me, when I'm in Scotland, the workout classes, it was like my Christmases had come at once. When in Edinburgh, I could get back to my workout classes. I was overjoyed. And then I had this taste of them for, I don't know, maybe about 4 weeks. And now they're closed. Although apparently we can go swimming. Apparently swimming is okay, but workout classes aren't. I haven't quite got my head around that. So not being able to do the things that we enjoy, having our freedom taken away from us, things that affect our locus of control, our self-care, of course those things are going to affect our state of mind. But that doesn't mean that we're not resilient. It's just that we're having a human experience, and we have the resources, and we recognize that we have the resources to be able to support ourselves during these times so that we don't slip off down a rabbit hole that we find ourselves really unable to get out of. Now, I would also add to that, especially given the times that we're in, that you can't be as resilient as you'd like to be if you're not applying self-care. So if we think about, stress in the workplace, the challenges that your employees are facing during this pandemic, COVID, opening up, having to close down. We've got some employees that have got their foot on the gas, not taking proper lunch breaks, going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting. They're not moving their body. They're really sedentary, perhaps not feeding their body what they need. Then again, all of these things are going to impact your state of mind. Whether they're taking the right supplements. You've got some people that are really missing their commute and struggling to switch off. You've got some people who don't know how to switch off, and therefore that's impacting them getting a really good sleep. And all of those factors, of course, they're going to contribute to how you show up the next day as the best version of yourself. Whether you've got the resources, the energy to show up and get through that day rather than feeling like you're dragging yourself through that day. So when it comes to teaching people about a resilient state of mind, I think we need to look at things holistically. We need to teach people about how to create this state of mind, how they need to line up their thoughts, their behaviours, their emotional responses, and also blend that in with what it is to be a healthy, happy, vibrant person, energetically, physically. I need to break away from this idea that resilience is about bouncing back, that resilience is about grit your teeth and get on with it and develop a thick skin. Because if that is your approach, trust me, at some point you're going to burn out. Because you're going to be holding your body in the stress response, the freeze, fight and flight response. And if you're holding your body in that stress response for a period of time, sooner or later you're going to get sick. Because 99% of physical health conditions start with the stress response. So this is where I can see organisations that can come in and change and transform the health and the well-being of their workplace, because most people don't know that they're stressed. So many people don't know what the signs are, the basic signs of stress, mentally, physically and emotionally. And I also think that we operate in a world where we tend to deal with things individually instead of big picture, instead of looking at things holistically. So if you, say, for example, have been experiencing constant headaches or migraines, do you look at that in isolation? Do you think, well, I'm just experiencing headaches? Or do you think about this from a big picture perspective and think, well, actually, what is it that my body's trying to communicate to me? What is it teaching me about taking a step back, about making some positive changes so that my body can go back to a natural state of coherence, that it can be at its optimal health? And it might be that you go to the GP and they just give you some medication and no conversation takes place about stress, about lifestyle, about sleep, about nutrition. And often, sadly, that is the case, especially in the UK. Or perhaps you are experiencing problems with your gut and your gut function. Maybe you've got a leaky gut. Maybe there's a lot of inflammation that's creating problems in the gut, like IBS, diarrhea. Maybe there's constipation. And again, it's whether somebody is looking at in isolation or looking at it from a big picture perspective and saying, you know what, this is stress. Stress creates inflammation, and that affects the gut and the gut health and the digestive system. So what positive changes can I make to climb off that stress response, to allow my body to do what it knows how to in order to heal? But if our employees don't know what they don't know, if they don't know what to recognize as the signs, if they don't know that the way that the mind and the body work in tandem together, they might not be able to put two and two together. They might not be able to join the dots and treat themselves at a much more holistic level than just trying to deal with the symptom, if that makes sense. So when it comes to creating resilience, that resilient state of mind, a resilient workforce, then I believe that we need to educate people. And we need to continue to educate people, because remember what I said about learning. We can teach people through, well-being weeks, but unless people return to that information within a matter of hours, unless they've got a vested interest in it, that they're more likely to continue learning, then those synaptic connections are gone. And the learning is often lost. So we need to consistently educate people about the mind and the body so that they can recognize the warning signs. They can recognize the red flags, and then they can do something about it. They can be proactive. And as I said, the body is capable of healing. Now, take an example of cutting your finger. You don't question whether your finger will heal. You just trust that your body will be able to heal that cut. So if we can show people what it is that they need to do to be able to turn around how they're feeling, turn around a situation, create a resilient state of mind, then we can prevent them from getting into chronic stress. Because when you're in chronic stress, it's much harder to recover from, because they've kept their body in the fight and flight and freeze response for so long. They've created this state of hypervigilance. And actually, we're really seeing that with COVID, because at the beginning of the year, we naturally got our fight and flight response triggered because of all the messages that we were receiving from the media. But how many of us have climbed off emergency alert, and how many people are still in it, still in this hypervigilant state, feeling even more anxious, worried about coming into contact with people, worrying about furlough, worrying about are they going to have a job, worrying about financially, are they going to be able to keep a roof over their head? So many people are still caught in that stress response. And there's also very little light at the end of the tunnel. Certainly not in the UK, that's not how it feels. And England today goes into another lockdown. So all of these contributing factors have the ability to trigger that survival response. So when it comes to resilience, resilience isn't static. It's a dynamic process which can be cultivated in your employees. And I've been working in this field for nearly a decade. And I do see that there are contributing factors which influence somebody's overall state of mind, their ability to navigate situations. And when you have these factors in place and in balance, then you have employees who are capable of getting through this situation unscathed. You have employees, a workforce that are capable of raising their game and sustaining their game, of being able to roll with the punches, take things in their stride, see things from a different perspective, think in a solution, innovative, creative way that's going to allow you as an organisation to thrive and to move forward into the future. So I'm going to share with you what I feel are the key factors that affect people's state of mind and therefore their resilience. And I would say, first up, it's emotional awareness. Now, if we think about the way that the mind works, about 95% of the way that you think and you feel and you believe, your beliefs, your physiology, your emotional responses, is all controlled by the unconscious mind, which means that you show up about 4% of the time consciously. So unless somebody's got an awareness of the way that they think, the way that they emotionally respond, their triggers, the things that trip them up, then we can't change them. You have to create that awareness. So teaching people how to be self-aware, educating people about the mind and their body in a way that helps them to raise their consciousness so that they can start to join the dots. And you know, it always amazes me how many people aren't aware of what's going on in their mind and their body. You know, I've run so many sessions over the years on stress management. And as I take people through the mind and the body and the stress response and what are the signs, what are the indicators, and the amount of people that are like, oh my God, I tick every box for pretty much everything that you've said. I didn't even realise that I was stressed. And I've been in this game for so long that to me now it's so obvious. But I remember way back when I still worked in human resources and I started to study solution-focused psychotherapy, and I started to think, wow, if people had the knowledge of the stress response, this could be a real game changer, because I didn't know what I didn't know back then. And people, they get so used to feeling a certain way that it can be the norm rather than the exception. So helping your employees to raise their consciousness through education is key. Second up is a word which is often coined as emotional intelligence. So in order for somebody to be emotionally intelligent, there has to be two factors in place. So first up, they have to have a level of self-awareness to be able to recognise how they think, their triggers, how they emotionally respond to people and situations, their behaviours. Because as I say, unless they've got that, how can employees be emotionally intelligent? There's a clue in the word intelligence. And B is the ability to regulate your emotional responses. So if you've got somebody that, for example, flies off the handle all the time, or shuts down, or runs away from conflict, is that emotionally intelligent behaviour? No, of course it's not. So if we want to help our employees become more emotionally intelligent, it's not enough to just teach them about EI. We have to help people to change the way that they feel about things. We have to help them to change the way that they think. Our emotions drive our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviours and our actions. And remember what I said, 95% of everything you do is unconscious. So it's not enough to just lay on a course about emotional intelligence. You can teach somebody about the theory, about the concept, but unless we back it up with the practical resources and techniques to help an employee change how they feel, to rewire their brain to operate differently, that operating platform, then nothing changes. And you can do all of this with some incredible techniques which are easy to learn. So one of the techniques that we have within our employee wellbeing portal, for example, is this amazing energy psychology technique called tapping, or EFT, or emotional freedom technique. And I won't go into the science of how it works, but we have that contained within our portal. And it teaches employees all about science. We give them videos that they can tap along to that can enable them to regulate their emotional responses. And when you do that often enough, you change the biochemistry of the body. You change how we respond to situations and to people. And we take their body back into a state of coherence. We take the body back into its natural state of well-being. And that, my friends, is a game changer. So, self-awareness, emotional intelligence. Another big factor, I think, that absolutely impacts our resilience and creating this state of mind is self-esteem. I don't think that we've really acknowledged enough how much self-esteem plays an influencing factor on somebody's state of mind and their mental health. So if you've got someone with low self-esteem, somebody that doesn't think that they're capable, that doesn't believe that they're good enough, that second guesses themselves, that doesn't feel that they can cope, is always thinking worst case scenario, is always putting themselves down, doesn't believe in themselves, doesn't recognize what they can do, then of course that's going to affect their state of mind and their ability to navigate situations. Of course it's going to affect how they respond to situations. And I actually think that low self-esteem is a pandemic. I think there's a lot of people out there that suffer with low self-esteem. So how do we improve the self-esteem of people in the workforce? Well, again, that comes down to knowledge, awareness, teaching people how to learn to love and accept themselves, how to create a different identity, how to get behind themselves, be a cheerleader. Now, again, we've got all of that within our wellbeing portal. Next up, our locus of control. So I come across a lot of people who would fondly describe themselves as control freaks. Now, I might not put it that way, but I would say that they over-control outcomes, that they over-control conditions, situations. And it might be that they're trying to do that because they feel anxious. And when we feel anxious, we try to control things in our environment that we feel safe. And sometimes with people that are over-controlling, it's because quite often they're trying to be perfect. They've got this massive, massive fear of failure. So they try to control everything because they just can't cope with feeling that in their eyes they've failed. So they will control things. They're very, very, very disciplined. They want to make sure that everything they do, they get right. You probably know these people. So if we have people who are over-controlling everything, well, control is a sense. It's a sense of control. But again, if you try to control the conditions, the environment, the outcome, then the wheels are going to come off. So of course, again, that's going to affect your resilience, your state of mind. Next up, I would say a sense of humour. Now, this might not be necessarily joined with having a positive state of mind, but I do believe that our ability to laugh at ourselves, to laugh at life, not to take things too seriously, plays a big part in resilience. Now, can a sense of humour be taught? I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I don't know if we can necessarily teach people to be Michael McIntyre, but what I do think is that when we give ourselves permission to just be ourselves, to be authentic, to not feel that we have to wear this mask, especially at work, then we can allow our true selves to come out. And hopefully that true self is able to laugh at situations, to feel more comfortable, and to have more of a sense of humour. Next up, positive coping strategies. Now again, unless we're taught positive coping strategies, how do we know how to cope? And it's how we cope which impacts our resilience, or it affirms that we can't cope. And I think a lot of time when people are under pressure, when they feel that their back is up against the wall, they're probably more likely to do things that don't support them. They might reach for ice cream. They might sit on the sofa watching Netflix, drinking wine. They're doing something to change the way that they feel, to distract them from how they're feeling, to distract them from facing up to situations, rather than doing something positive to change the way that they feel, to change how they manage a situation, how they deal with a situation. So the more that we can teach our employees positive coping mechanisms that they can learn, and then they recognise, you know what, I've got the resources so that when life does throw me lemons, I know how to make lemonade. Now, another thing that I see around resilience and being able to create this state of mind that is a resilient one is the ability to put something into perspective, to not take things personally. But again, it's all influenced by our state of mind. So if you've got somebody that's spent a lifetime taking things personally, feeling like they're being criticised, and then you've got a trainer that's saying, just don't take things personally. Well, that's like throwing jelly against the wall and hoping that it sticks. So we have to teach people, our employees, how do we create a different response? How do you teach the mind and body a different response? How do you teach people how to put things in perspective? And again, that's about teaching them the resources and the means to change the way that they think and they feel and they behave. Next up, healthy working relationships, healthy, positive relationships. And I think a big part of that is about, again, self-esteem. If you've got healthy self-esteem, you're more likely to feel comfortable putting boundaries in place, saying no. When we lack self-esteem, we usually lack the ability to put boundaries in place because we're too busy trying to get validation, to get our needs met in a way that doesn't necessarily serve us in the long run. And then finally, I would say absolutely self-care. And I mentioned this earlier. And if we think about self-care, self-care is a huge topic on its own. But if we think about the basics, laying a positive foundation of self-care, how hydrated you are, what your nutrition's like, the supplements that you take, what exercise do you do, how you take care of yourself mentally, the quality of your sleep, getting those basics right. And again, we need to teach people this because a lot of people, they just keep doing what they've always done, which, as they say, is the definition of insanity. If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. So if we want to create a workforce of people that have got a state of mind that is resilient, that serves them in both the short, medium and long term, then hopefully today's episode has helped you to see what we mean by this term and to recognise that we do need to take a holistic, consistent approach to giving our employees the knowledge and the resources to create that state of mind, so that they can come out of this situation in a place that they're stronger, they're healthier, they're recharged, and they've got the resources, they've got the energy to help you as an organisation move forward and continue to thrive. So if you'd like to book a demo of the Employee Wellbeing Portal, or you're looking for any support around the mental health and resilience of your employees, then do get in touch with us at www.themindsolution.com. Thank you for listening, and join me next week where we're going to be looking at vulnerability and what it means to be vulnerable. And there's a really vulnerable times, but as we'll explore next week, there's often a big barrier that we present around being vulnerable that can impact us from sharing how we feel, especially in the workplace. So thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week.